Well, welcome. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about diversity and how you can actually promote diversity. And so the first thing to do is to define what is diversity. There's lots and lots of different ways to actually define what is diversity, but in general there's a couple things that ecologists and biologists like to use to define diversity. And so the first thing is this idea of richness. And so when most people say, oh, that area is really, really diverse, they refer to the different types of things that occur there. And so richness is literally the number of unique species within an area. And so that's usually what people talk about when they say diversity, and they're talking about the different types of things. But when we talk about diversity as scientists, we're not just referring to richness in many cases, but we also are referring to the kind of relative abundance of different species. And this is what is referred to as evenness. And so an even community is one where the relative abundance is roughly the same. Whereas alternatively, something that's not as diverse is where you have an area that's really uneven. So maybe you have a whole lot of one species and then a little tiny bit of a whole bunch of other species. And so these are the two components that make up diversity. And so I have a couple of examples to kind of show you and demonstrate how this actually works out and what it actually looks like when you're thinking about diversity. So in this particular case, I'm looking at different types of candies. And so as you can see, this is my first slide of what could potentially look like in terms of diversity. So if we looked at this slide and said, is this fairly diverse? You may look at all the different types of candies and say, well, yeah, it does seem like it's really diverse because we can see there's gummy bears and we can see there's Hershey's Kisses and peanut butter cups and licorice, M&Ms, there's all sorts of different types, okay? But that's not really the only thing we look at because we can say, well, sure, is this diverse? Yes, it is. But really, diversity comes into use and is very, very useful if we compare it with other types of communities. So if this is our first community of candy, we can compare it to this one, okay? And if I were then to ask you, is this community more diverse, what would you say? So there's this one, which is our second one, and here's our first one. What do you think? And then let's go back to that second one. Well, sometimes it's not intuitive, but in many cases we can say that this is actually the community of candies that's actually far more diverse. They both have the same number of candies, which is 24 individual pieces. So that's really not the difference. And if you looked, they also both have the same richness. So that is, they both have the Hershey's Kisses, they both have the gummy bears, they both have the peppermints, they both have licorice, they both have M&Ms. So there's 6 different types of candies. So richness equals 6 in this case as well as in the previous case. The difference is, in this particular case, you can see that there are actually 4 items of each type of candy. So they're perfectly even. Whereas if we go back, you can see that in this particular case, it's not really even, okay? So if we were to have all these candies, say, in a bag and put our hand into the bag and reach in and grab one candy, it's certainly more likely that you would grab one kind or another. Clearly, as you can see, it's probably more likely that you're going to grab, say, one of the M&Ms because there's a whole lot more of them. They're more abundant than, say, the peanut butters, okay? Alternatively, if you put your hand in this bag, you have an equal likelihood of grabbing any of the types of candy because they're all equally abundant, which makes this a far more diverse community, even though the richness is identical. It's also worth noting that although we have these 2 different ways or measures of diversity, that we can actually put those together. And so kind of a mathematical way of actually putting those together is what's called a diversity index. And so we can actually put estimates of richness, which is an actual number, together with estimates of evenness, which ranges from 0 to 1. 1 being it's perfectly even, everything is identical in terms of the relative abundance. And so then you just get a single value of the diversity of an area. And it's then very useful to be able to compare the diversity indices of one community to another. If it's higher, then it's more diverse. And so we'll use those as we look at some real data sets in the next video.